The rain over Chicago was thick and gray, matching the somber mood inside the private chapel of the Moretti estate. This wasn't a wedding. It was a merger signed in blood and ink. Alara Vance stood in a lace gown that felt more like a shroud than a bridal dress. Her father, a man who had gambled away his loyalty to the wrong people, had sold her to the devil of the Midwest, Dante Moretti. Dante stood at the altar, a tall, imposing figure in a charcoal suit. His face was a masterpiece of cold marble, handsome, yet devoid of any warmth. His eyes, a piercing shade of steel blue, didn't look at Alara as she walked down the aisle. They looked through her. When it came time for the vows, Dante didn't whisper them. He spoke them like a death sentence. As he slid the 5-carat diamond onto her finger, his grip was firm, almost bruising. "I do," he said, his voice a low growl that vibrated in Alara's chest. After the ceremony, there was no grand reception. Only a silent dinner in the sprawling dining hall of his fortress-like mansion. Dante didn't touch his wine. He stared at Alara until she felt like she was under a microscope. "You look terrified," he finally said, his voice cutting through the silence. "I'm exactly where I was forced to be," Alara replied, her voice trembling but her eyes remaining steady. "Should I be dancing?" Dante stood up, walking slowly around the table. He stopped behind her, his hand resting heavily on her shoulder. The heat from his palm was the only warm thing in the room. He leaned down, his breath ghosting against her ear. "Let's get one thing straight, Alara. This marriage means nothing. You are a debt paid, a ghost in my house. I don't want your love, and I certainly don't want your company. You will stay in the East Wing. I will stay in the West. We will play the part of the happy couple for the public, but behind these doors, you are a stranger." Alara swallowed hard. "And if I want more? If I want my freedom?" Dante laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Freedom is a luxury for those who don't owe me their lives. You are Moretti now. The only way you leave this house is in a casket." He pulled away, leaving her shivering in the sudden cold. "Pack your bags," he added as he reached the door. "My associates expect a honeymoon. We leave for the Amalfi Coast tomorrow. It's a business trip disguised as a romantic getaway. Don't expect a bed-sharing arrangement." As he slammed the door, Alara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked down at the ring on her finger. It felt like a handcuff. But Dante Moretti had made one mistake. He assumed she was just a fragile pawn. He didn't know that Alara had been keeping her own ledger, or that she had spent years learning how to survive men like him. Late that night, Alara sat at the vanity in her new, cold bedroom. She reached behind the mirror and pulled out a small, encrypted burner phone. A message flashed on the screen. "You're in. Don't let him suspect anything. The Valeni family is waiting for the signal." Alara's face hardened. Her father hadn't just sold her to pay a debt. He had sent her in as a Trojan horse. But as she looked at the heavy oak door that led toward Dante's side of the house, a strange feeling washed over her. Dante thought he was the one in control. He thought he was the hunter. He had no idea that the ghost he just brought into his home was the one who held the matches to burn his empire down. But there was something in Dante's eyes, a flicker of something hidden beneath the ice, that made her heart race in a way it shouldn't. The honeymoon was meant to be a facade, a simple trip to maintain the image of the Moretti power. But as the storm raged outside the mansion, both of them were unaware that the Amalfi sun would melt more than just the distance between them. It would ignite a fire that neither of them was prepared to extinguish. The private Gulfstream G650 cut through the night sky like a silver blade. Inside the cabin, the luxury was suffocating. Leather seats, crystal decanters of aged scotch, and the scent of expensive cigars. To any outsider, this was the height of romance. To Alara, it was a pressurized cage. Dante sat across from her, his laptop open, his fingers flying across the keys. He hadn't spoken a word since they boarded. He treated her like a piece of luggage, necessary to transport, but otherwise ignored. Alara leaned her head against the cold window, watching the city lights of the East Coast fade into the black abyss of the Atlantic. In her silk slip dress and an oversized cashmere cardigan, She looked fragile. But beneath the cardigan, tucked into the waistband of her leggings, was the burner phone. "You're too quiet," Dante said, his voice slicing through the hum of the engines. He didn't look up from his screen. "I didn't think I was allowed to speak without permission," Alara retorted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Isn't that part of the meaningless contract?" Dante closed his laptop with a sharp thud. He stood up and moved toward her. In the confined space of the jet, his presence was overwhelming. He sat on the edge of the ottoman directly in front of her, forcing her to look at him. "You have a sharp tongue for someone whose father is one phone call away from a shallow grave," he murmured. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was electric, a jarring contrast to his icy tone. "Why aren't you crying? Most girls in your position would be begging for mercy." Alara didn't flinch. "Tears don't pay debts, Dante. And I stopped begging for things a long time ago." Dante's eyes darkened. For a moment, the mask of the cold boss slipped, revealing a flicker of raw curiosity. He leaned closer, his scent, sandalwood and something metallic, filling her senses. "You're a puzzle, Alara. But don't mistake my curiosity for interest. Once we land in Italy, I have meetings with the Sicilian heads. You will play the blushing bride. You will smile. You will hold my arm, and you will let them think I am obsessed with you. And if I don't?" Dante's grip on her jaw tightened, not enough to hurt, but enough to command. "Then I'll remind you exactly why they call me the devil. I don't lose, Alara. Not at business, and certainly not at people." Suddenly, the plane jolted violently. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed, and the lights flickered. Alara gasped, her hand instinctively reaching out and grabbing Dante's forearm. His muscles were like granite beneath his shirt. "Turbulence," Dante said, his voice calm, though his eyes scanned the cabin. But it wasn't just turbulence. A muffled explosion rocked the back of the plane. Smoke began to curl from the ventilation grates. "Dante!" Alara cried out as the plane banked sharply to the left. Dante was on his feet in a second, pulling a 9mm handgun from a concealed holster under the table. "Stay down. Get behind the reinforced seat." The door to the cockpit burst open, but it wasn't the pilot. It was a man in a tactical vest, his face obscured by a mask. He leveled a submachine gun at Dante. Everything happened in a blur of violence. Dante lunged, his movements a terrifying display of lethal grace. He fired 2 shots, clean, precise. The attacker slumped to the floor. Alara huddled in the corner, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't a movie. This was the reality of the man she had married. Dante grabbed her by the waist, hauling her toward the back of the plane. "We have to move. The cabin is losing pressure." "Who are they?" she screamed over the rushing wind. "Someone who wants to make me a widower before the honeymoon starts," Dante growled. He kicked open a side compartment, pulling out 2 emergency parachutes. He strapped the first one onto Alara with frantic, trembling hands, the first sign of emotion she had seen from him. His face was inches from hers. "Listen to me. We are over the coast of the Azores. The water is cold, but there are patrol boats nearby. You jump, you pull the cord when I tell you. Do you understand?" "What about you?" "I'm right behind you," he said. He looked at her, then really looked at her. There was no ice, only a fierce, burning intensity. "Don't you dare die on me, Alara. You're the only person I have left to hate." Without waiting for her answer, he shoved her toward the open jump door. The roar of the wind was deafening. Alara looked down at the dark, swirling ocean miles below. "Jump," Dante commanded. She jumped. The freezing air stole her breath. Seconds later, she saw a shadow plummeting after her. As she pulled her ripcord and the silk canopy bloomed above her, she watched Dante do the same. They drifted down toward the black waves, 2 souls bound by a loveless vow, now fighting for survival in the middle of nowhere. As they hit the icy water, Alara struggled against the heavy fabric of the parachute. She was being pulled under. She clawed at the water, her lungs screaming for air. Just as the darkness began to take her, a powerful arm wrapped around her waist. Dante pulled her to the surface. They bobbed in the waves, the wreckage of the plane a distant, burning star in the sky above. "I've got you," Dante gasped, his voice raw. He held her close, his body heat the only thing keeping her from freezing. In that moment, in the middle of the Atlantic, the meaningless marriage felt like the only thing that was real. Dante held her with a grip that wasn't just about protection, it was a grip of possession. He had lost control of the situation, and in doing so, he was beginning to lose control of his heart. The world was a blur of gray salt spray and the rhythmic, thunderous roar of the Atlantic crashing against jagged rocks. Alara's lungs burned as she coughed up seawater, her body trembling so violently she couldn't feel her own limbs. "Don't stop moving," a voice commanded. It was hoarse, strained, but still carried that undeniable authority. Dante was dragging her across the black volcanic sand of a secluded cove. His suit jacket was gone, his white shirt torn and translucent, clinging to the heavy muscles of his back. He looked like a fallen god, battered by the heavens but refusing to die. He pulled her into the shadows of a small sea cave, shielded from the biting wind. The moment he let go, he collapsed against the stone wall, his face ghostly pale. "Dante!" Alara scrambled toward him, her hands shaking. It was only then that she saw the dark crimson stains spreading across his side. The bullet from the plane had grazed him, and the struggle in the ocean had reopened the wound. "It's nothing," he grunted, his teeth gritted in pain. Check your cardigan. Did the phone survive?" Alara reached into her damp clothes and pulled out the encrypted burner phone. It was ruggedized, but the screen was dark. She pressed the power button. It flickered to life. "It works. I can call." "No," Dante barked, reaching out and grabbing her wrist. His hand was freezing, but his grip was still a vice. "The Valeni family. They have ears everywhere. If you signal for help on an open line, you're signaling our location to the people who just blew up my plane. We stay dark until I can reach my personal security." Alara looked at him, her heart hammering. She was supposed to be the one betraying him, yet here he was, bleeding out while trying to protect her from the very people she was secretly tied to. "You're bleeding too much," she whispered. "I need to tie this off." She reached for the hem of her silk slip dress. With a sharp tug, she tore a long strip of the expensive fabric. Dante watched her, his steel blue eyes clouded with a mixture of pain and something else, something that looked dangerously like admiration. "I told you this marriage meant nothing," he wheezed as she leaned in to press the cloth against his wound. "You should have let the waves take me. You'd be free. A rich widow." Alara paused, her fingers inches from his skin. She looked him dead in the eye. "I don't want to be a widow to a ghost, Dante. And I don't take orders from a man who's about to pass out." As she pressed the bandage down, Dante let out a sharp hiss, his head falling back against the rock. The silence of the cave grew heavy, filled only with the sound of their labored breathing. To stop the hypothermia, they had no choice. "We need body heat," Dante muttered, his voice dropping to a low, vulnerable register she had never heard before. "The sun won't be up for hours. If we don't stay warm, we won't make it to morning." Alara hesitated, then slowly crawled closer. Dante opened his arms, not with the command of a boss, but with the desperation of a drowning man. She moved into his embrace, her back against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight. Despite the cold, where their skin met, it felt like liquid fire. Alara could feel the steady thrum of his heart against her spine. It was a powerful, rhythmic beat, the sound of a man who refused to be conquered. "Dante?" she whispered into the darkness. Why did you jump after me? You had the other parachute. You could have stayed on the plane, tried to land it. You risked everything for a debt." Dante was silent for a long time. She thought he might have fallen unconscious, but then his breath hitched against her neck. "My father always told me that a Moretti never leaves behind what belongs to him," he said, his voice raw. "But that's a lie. I didn't jump for the name, Alara. I jumped because when I saw you falling, the thought of this world without your defiance in it felt empty." Alara's breath caught. This wasn't the Mafia boss. This was a man stripped of his armor, admitting a truth that terrified him. She turned in his arms, her face inches from his. In the dim light of the cave, she saw a scar on his collarbone she hadn't noticed before, 3 small dots in a triangular pattern. Her blood ran cold. That was the mark of the initiate, a mark given to those forced into the syndicate against their will. "You didn't choose this life, did you?" she asked softly. Dante's eyes sharpened, the ice returning for a brief second before melting into a profound sadness. "None of us choose the blood we're born into. We just choose how much of it we're willing to spill to stay alive." Suddenly, his hand moved, cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed over her lower lip. The tension in the cave shifted from survival to something electric, something volatile. Dante's gaze dropped to her mouth. He was losing control, not of his empire, but of the wall he had built around his heart. "You are my ruin, Alara," he whispered. He leaned in, his lips hovering a breath away from hers. The meaningless vow was a distant memory. But just as his lips touched hers, the burner phone in Alara's pocket vibrated. The screen lit up the cave with a harsh, white light. A message appeared. "Target confirmed at the cove. Finish them both.
No witnesses."
Alara froze. The message hadn't come from the Valentes. It had come from her father. Dante saw the screen. He saw the sender's name. His face transformed instantly, the vulnerability vanishing, replaced by a cold, murderous fury that was far more terrifying than the storm outside. He pushed her away, his eyes burning with a lethal light. "So," he said, his voice a low, dangerous snarl. "The ghost finally shows her teeth." He stood up, ignoring the agony in his side, and drew a backup blade from his boot. Outside, the sound of a helicopter approached, its searchlight cutting through the darkness like a scythe. "Dante, I can explain," Alara started, but he cut her off. "Don't," he hissed. "You said you didn't want to be a widow. Well, pray you survive the next 10 minutes, because if the hitmen don't kill you, I might." The betrayal was out. The honeymoon had turned into a hunt. And as the first of the mercenaries rappelled down from the helicopter, Alara realized that the man she was falling for was now the man who wanted her dead. The searchlight of the helicopter swept over the black sand like the eye of a vengeful god. The roar of the rotors drowned out the crashing waves, and the air was filled with the smell of aviation fuel and impending death. Dante stood at the mouth of the cave, his silhouette dark and jagged against the light. He didn't look back at Alara. The silence between them was louder than the helicopter. It was the silence of a grave. "Dante, listen to me." Alara shouted over the noise. "I didn't send that message. My father, he's using me as bait." Dante turned his head just enough for her to see the cold curve of his jaw. "You brought a tracker into my world, Alara. You gave them the coordinates. Whether you did it with a smile or a tear doesn't matter to the bullets about to fly." 3 mercenaries in matte black gear slid down fast ropes from the hovering chopper. They hit the sand with practiced precision, raising suppressed submachine guns. "Stay behind the rocks," Dante commanded, his voice devoid of the warmth it had held only minutes prior. "If you try to run to them, I will put a bullet in your back myself." The first mercenary fired. A line of sparks erupted from the cave wall as Dante dived into a roll. Even injured, he was a blur of lethal efficiency. He fired his backup handgun, crack crack, and the lead mercenary went down, clutching a punctured throat. But there were more. A second chopper was appearing over the cliffside. Alara realized with a sickening jolt that she couldn't just hide. Her father didn't want her back, he wanted her silenced. She was the only witness to his secret deals with the Valenti family, the very rivals Dante was supposed to meet in Italy. One of the mercenaries bypassed Dante, flanking through the shadows toward Alara. He saw her, a girl in a torn silk dress, and raised his weapon. "Dante left," she screamed. Dante was pinned by suppressive fire. He couldn't reach her. The mercenary sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. In that split second, the fragile pawn, Alara Vance, vanished. She didn't scream. She didn't pray. She lunged forward, grabbing a heavy, jagged piece of volcanic rock from the cave floor. As the mercenary fired, she dived low. The bullets whistled over her head. She slammed the rock into the man's knee with a sickening crunch. Then, as he buckled, she grabbed his combat knife from his tactical vest and drove it into the gap in his body armor. The man fell with a gurgle. Alara stood over him, her hands trembling, her white dress now splattered with dark crimson. She picked up his submachine gun, her eyes burning with a cold, desperate fire. Dante, having finished his own targets, froze. He looked at Alara, not at the dress or the beauty, but at the weapon in her hand and the look in her eyes. It was the look of a killer. "Get to the cliff," Dante shouted, snapping out of his shock. "There's a tunnel system used by smugglers. If we don't get underground, the thermal cameras on those choppers will turn us into Swiss cheese." They sprinted across the sand, bullets kicking up plumes of dust around their heels. Dante grabbed Alara's hand, hauling her up a steep, hidden crevice in the rock face. They tumbled into a narrow, damp tunnel just as a missile from the second helicopter turned the cave they had been in into a fireball. The explosion shook the earth. Dust and heat choked the tunnel. Inside the darkness, Dante slammed Alara against the stone wall. He held her there, his forearm pressed against her throat, his eyes searching hers in the gloom. "Who are you?" he hissed. "No socialite knows how to take down a tier. One mercenary like that." Alara gasped for air, her heart drumming against his arm. "My father. He didn't just raise a daughter, Dante. He raised an insurance policy. He had me trained by ex-Mossad since I was 12. He wanted a spy he could sell to the highest bidder. But I'm not his spy anymore." Dante's grip loosened slightly, but his gaze remained predatory. "The message on the phone. Explain it." "He thinks I have the Moretti ledger," she whispered. "The digital key to all your offshore accounts and your list of informants. He told the Vallenis I would steal it during the honeymoon and give it to them, but he knows I'd never give it to him. So he's killing two birds with one stone. He gets rid of the man who owns his debt, and he kills the only person who knows his true crimes." Dante stared at her, the gears of his mind turning. The meaningless marriage was suddenly the center of a global power struggle. "I don't have the ledger," Dante said quietly. "It doesn't exist. It's a myth my father created to keep our enemies afraid." "I know," Alara said, a single tear finally escaping. "That's why he's trying to kill us. He realized the debt he sold me for was based on a lie. And he can't let the Moretti family find out he's been embezzling from the Valentis using your name." Dante lowered his arm. The fury was still there, but it was no longer directed at her. It was a cold, calculating rage directed at the world that had tried to use them both. He reached out, his fingers brushing the blood on her cheek. Blood that wasn't hers. "You're a liar, Alara. A dangerous, beautiful liar." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. His voice was a ragged whisper. "And God help me, I think I'm starting to trust you." He didn't kiss her. It was something more intimate, a silent pact made in the dark, buried under the earth. "We have to get to the villa in Amalfi," Dante said, pulling back. "My inner circle is there. If we can reach it, we can turn the tide. But the journey will be a bloodbath." "Then let's give them a show," Alara replied, checking the magazine of her stolen gun. Dante looked at her, a dark, twisted smile touching his lips. He had said this marriage meant nothing. But as they began to move through the shadows of the tunnel, he realized he would burn the whole world down just to keep her by his side. The honeymoon was over. The war had begun. The sun rose over the Amalfi coast, turning the Tyrrhenian Sea into a sheet of hammered gold. But for Dante and Alara, the beauty was a curse. They emerged from the smugglers' tunnel 3 miles north of their original destination, battered, bloodied, and blinking against the sudden, cruel brightness of a Mediterranean morning. Dante's face was a mask of exhaustion, his white shirt now a rag of crimson and gray. He leaned heavily against a lemon tree, the sweet, citrus scent clashing violently with the metallic tang of blood. "We can't walk into Amalfi looking like this," Alara whispered, scanning the winding coastal road below. "The police will stop us, or worse, your father's friends will spot us from a mile away." Dante nodded, his breath hitching. "There's a village." Positano is too crowded. We go to Priano. I have a contact there. An old woman who served my mother. She's loyal to the woman, not the Moretti name. They moved through the terraced groves like ghosts. Ilera kept her stolen submachine gun hidden under her ruined cardigan, her finger never far from the trigger. She watched Dante out of the corner of her eye. He was flagging, the blood loss from his side finally taking its toll. "Dante," she said, catching him as he stumbled. "Lean on me. I don't need." "Shut up," she snapped, pulling his heavy arm over her shoulders. "You said I was a debt. Well, consider this interest. Don't die on me now, or I'll never get my freedom." Dante looked down at her, a faint, dark smirk touching his lips despite the pain. "You're a terrifying woman, Ilera." They reached the village by midday. It was a cluster of pastel houses clinging to the cliffs. They found the house, a small, vine-covered cottage at the edge of the village. An elderly woman with eyes like obsidian opened the door. One look at Dante, and she ushered them inside without a word. "Nani?" Dante groaned as he sank into a wooden chair. The woman, Maria, spoke rapid-fire Italian, her hands already moving to fetch water and bandages. She looked at Ilera, then back at Dante. "Your wife?" she asked in a thick accent. "A business arrangement," Dante muttered. Maria snorted, looking at the way Ilera was already tearing clean sheets to make bandages. "The way she holds you says otherwise, Piccolo Diavolo." While Maria tended to Dante's wound in the back room, Ilera stood by the window, watching the street. Her burner phone buzzed. A news alert: private jet of Chicago mogul Dante Moretti missing over Atlantic. Both Moretti and his new bride, Ilera Vance, presumed dead. She felt a cold shiver. They were ghosts now. To the world, they didn't exist. This gave them an advantage, but it also meant no one was coming to save them. "He's sleeping," Maria said, walking into the kitchen. She handed Ilera a simple linen dress.
"Vash, ut."
"Then go to him. He calls for you in his fever." Ilera washed the salt and blood from her skin, the cool water a luxury she hadn't expected to feel again. She put on the simple dress, feeling strangely exposed without her armor. She entered the small bedroom where Dante lay. The shutters were half closed, stripes of orange light dancing across his bare chest. His wound was stitched and bandaged. He looked younger when he was asleep, less like a monster, more like a man who had carried the weight of a kingdom since he was a boy. She sat on the edge of the bed, reaching out to brush a stray lock of dark hair from his forehead. His skin was burning. Suddenly, his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. "Ilera?" "I'm here, Dante. It's okay." He pulled her down, his strength surprising her even in his weakened state. He didn't let go of her wrist. Instead, he pulled her flush against him. The heat of his body radiated through the thin linen of her dress. "I saw you." In the water, he rasped, his voice thick with fever and raw emotion. "I thought I lost the only thing that made me feel alive." Ilera's heart hammered. "You said this marriage meant nothing. You said I was a stranger." Dante's eyes locked onto hers, the steel blue now a deep, turbulent indigo. He reached up, his hand cupping the back of her neck, pulling her face inches from his. "I lied," he whispered. "I lied to myself. From the moment I saw you walk down that aisle, I wanted to break you.
But now,
I just want to keep you." The tension that had been building since the plane, since the cave, since the first time they touched, finally snapped. Dante surged upward, his lips crashing against hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision of two broken people, a desperate, hungry claim. In that kiss, the mafia boss vanished. He lost control. He pulled her onto the bed, his hands roaming over her curves with a possessiveness that left her breathless. Ilera didn't pull away. She leaned into it, her own walls crumbling. For the first time in her life, she wasn't a spy or a pawn. She was a woman being wanted by a man who would burn the world for her. They lay there for hours as the sun dipped below the horizon, the lines between duty and desire completely erased. But as the moon rose over the lemon trees, a shadow fell across the cottage floor. Maria was standing in the doorway, her face pale. "Dante," she whispered, "there are men in the village. Men with the Vance crest on their rings. They are asking for the widow." Dante sat up, his eyes instantly turning back to ice. The moment of peace was shattered. Alera's father hadn't just reported them dead. He was already here to collect the inheritance. "Alera," Dante said, his voice low and lethal as he reached for his gun on the nightstand. "How much do you love your father?" Alera stood up, smoothing her dress, her eyes reflecting the cold moonlight. "He died to me the day he sold me to you, Dante. Let's finish this." The air in Priano was thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the cold, metallic tang of gun oil. Outside Maria's cottage, the moonlight hit the stone steps of the vertical village, casting long, distorted shadows. Dante stood by the door, his silhouette sharp and lethal. He checked the slide of his handgun, his movements robotic and precise despite the bandage tightening around his ribs. He looked at Alera, who was tying back her hair with a strip of linen, her eyes narrowed in focus. She didn't look like the socialite he had married a week ago. She looked like a Valkyrie. "Maria has a cellar that leads to the lower terraces," Dante whispered, his voice low and gravelly. "We move through the lemon groves. If we stay on the main stairs, we're sitting ducks." "How many are there?" Alera asked, checking the weight of the submachine gun she had salvaged. "At least a dozen," Dante replied. "But they don't know this terrain. This is my backyard, Alera. They think they're hunting a wounded animal, but they've walked into a slaughterhouse." As they slipped out the back door into the dense, shadowed groves, the first flashlight beams cut through the darkness above them. Voices echoed in the narrow alleys, harsh, American accents that didn't belong in this quiet Italian paradise. "Find the girl," a voice commanded. "The boss wants her alive for the signature. The husband is collateral. Finish him." Alera felt a cold surge of hatred. The signature. Her father wanted her alive only long enough to sign over the Moretti assets he believed she had inherited upon Dante's death. They moved like ghosts through the trees. Dante led the way, his hand occasionally reaching back to guide Alera over the uneven stone walls. Every time his skin touched hers, a jolt of electricity surged through her, a reminder of the heat they had shared only hours before. The meaningless label was dead, buried under the weight of their shared survival. Suddenly, a twig snapped to their left. Dante didn't hesitate. He pivoted and fired 2 suppressed shots. A man tumbled from behind a stone pillar, his flashlight rolling across the grass. "Go!" Dante hissed. They sprinted down the terraces, the village now alive with the sound of pursuit. The mercenaries had spotted them. Bullets began to chew through the lemon trees, showering them in white blossoms and bitter leaves. They reached a small stone plaza overlooking the sea. There was nowhere left to go but down a steep, narrow staircase that led toward the harbor. "Dante, look." Alera pointed toward the water. A sleek black speedboat was idling in the dark cove below, its lights dimmed. A man stood on the deck, signaling with a red flare. "That's Marco," Dante said, a look of relief finally crossing his face. "My most trusted lieutenant. He must have tracked the plane's signal before it went down. If we can reach that boat, we can get to my stronghold in Naples." They fought their way down the steps. Alera provided cover fire, her training kicking in with a cold, terrifying efficiency. She saw Dante watching her, a look of dark pride in his eyes. He was losing control of the narrative he had written for their marriage. He didn't want a ghost anymore. He wanted this woman, this warrior, by his side forever. They reached the pier, gasping for air. Marco and 3 other Moretti soldiers were waiting, their rifles trained on the cliffs above to hold back the Vance mercenaries. "Don, thank God," Marco said, stepping off the boat to help Dante across the gap. "We thought we'd lost you." Dante gripped Marco's arm. "You're late, Marco, but I've never been happier to see your ugly face." Dante stepped onto the boat, then turned to reach for Alera. "Come on, Alera. We're safe now." Alera reached for his hand, her heart finally beginning to slow. But as she stepped onto the deck, she noticed something. Marco wasn't looking at the cliffs. He was looking at Dante's back.
And he was smiling.
It wasn't a smile of relief. It was a smile of victory. Marco. Alara whispered, her hand freezing inches from Dante's. You know, Dante, Marco said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its warmth. The Valeni family pays much better than you do. And your father-in-law? He's a very generous man when he's desperate. Before Dante could react, Marco stepped back and raised his weapon. At the same time, the 3 soldiers on the boat turned their guns on Dante and Alara. The air went still. The sound of the waves suddenly felt like a countdown. You sold me out? Dante's voice was a low, dangerous snarl. The betrayal cut deeper than any bullet. Marco had been his best friend since childhood. Business is business, Dante. You said it yourself. This marriage was meaningless. So, why die for a girl who was sent to spy on you?
Marco is native.
He looked at Alara. Step away from him, princess. Your father is waiting in the cabin. He wants to have a word about that signature. The cabin door opened. Silas Vance stepped out, looking pristine in a gray suit, as if he hadn't just orchestrated a plane crash and a massacre. Alara, dear, her father said, his voice oily and thin. Don't make this difficult. Sign the papers and I might let Mr. Moretti live long enough to watch me take his empire. Alara looked at her father, then at Marco, and finally at Dante. Dante looked at her with a raw, agonizing vulnerability. He thought he had lost. He thought he had let his guard down for the wrong woman, and now he was paying the price. But Alara saw something they didn't. She saw the backup grenade tucked into Dante's belt, hidden by his torn shirt. And she saw the way the fuel lines for the boat ran right under the deck where Marco was standing. She looked her father in the eye, her voice steady and cold. I told you once, father. I don't take orders from men who are about to pass out. In one fluid motion, Alara didn't reach for the pen her father held out. She reached for the submachine gun strapped to her back and fired a burst directly into the fuel containers at the stern of the boat. Dante, jump. She screamed. The world turned orange. The explosion was a roar of orange and black that swallowed the night. The shockwave hit Alara like a physical wall, throwing her backward into the churning, icy waters of the Mediterranean. For a moment, there was only silence, a ringing, hollow void where the world used to be. Then, the fire returned. She surfaced, gasping for air that tasted of salt and gasoline. The speedboat was a skeleton of burning mahogany. Pieces of debris rained down around her like falling stars. Dante, she screamed, her voice cracking. Dante. She saw him. He was 20 yards away, clinging to a piece of the hull, his face covered in soot and blood. He looked toward her, his eyes wide with a terror she had never seen in him, a terror not for himself, but for her. Alara. Swim to the... His words were cut off by the low, predatory hum of a secondary engine. Out of the smoke emerged a smaller, sturdier inflatable RIB, rigid inflatable boat. On board was Silas Vance, his face scorched, his expensive suit ruined, but his eyes burning with a manic, obsessive greed. Beside him stood Marco, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, but very much alive. Pick her up, Silas barked. Before Alara could dive, Marco's hand reached down, grabbing her by the hair and hauling her violently onto the inflatable. She fought, kicking and clawing, but a heavy blow to the back of her head sent the world spinning into darkness. The last thing she saw was Dante, screaming her name as he tried to swim toward them, his injured body failing him against the current. When Dante finally dragged himself onto the rocky shore of a deserted cove, he was more ghost than man. His stitches had ripped, his lungs were heavy with seawater, and his heart felt like it had been carved out of his chest with a dull knife. He lay on the cold stones, staring up at the moon. He had told her this marriage meant nothing. He had told her she was a debt. But as he watched the boat carrying her disappear into the horizon, he realized he had been a fool. The devil of Chicago had been brought to his knees not by a rival family, but by a woman who had saved his life twice. I will burn the world for you, Alara, he whispered into the wind. I will turn this coast into a graveyard. Dante didn't go to the police. He didn't go to his family. He went to a small, nondescript garage in the outskirts of Naples, a dead zone, safe house, known only to him. Inside was a collection of weapons, untraceable currency, and a black armored SUV. He spent the next 6 hours in a cold, murderous trance. He stitched his own wound with a fishing line and a bottle of bourbon. He loaded magazines with a terrifying, rhythmic precision. He wasn't just a boss anymore. He was a predator who had lost his mate. He made one phone call, not to his soldiers, but to an old, retired cleaner named Lorenzo. I need the location of Silas Vance, Dante said, his voice a flat, dead line. Dante? The world thinks you're dead, Lorenzo's gravelly voice crackled. The world is about to find out how much of a mistake that was. Where is he? He's at the Valenti fortress in Ravello. They've moved Alara there. Silas is selling her to the Valenti patriarch. They want the codes to your offshore accounts, Dante. They're going to torture her until she signs the transfer of power. Dante's grip on the phone tightened until the glass cracked. How many men? At least 40. It's a suicide mission, kid. Then it's a good day to die, Dante said, and hung up. The Valenti fortress was a sprawling villa perched on the highest cliff of Ravello, surrounded by ancient stone walls and modern security sensors. Inside the basement, Alara was chained to a heavy wooden chair. Her face was bruised, her white dress now a rag of gray and red. Silas Vance stood in front of her, holding a tablet. Just the biometric scan, Alara, her father said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. Once you authorize the transfer of the Moretti assets to the Valenti-Vance merger, I'll let you go. You can go back to being a ghost. Alara spat blood at his feet. He's coming for you. And when he does, I hope he lets me watch you scream. Silas laughed, a high-pitched, desperate sound. Dante Moretti is at the bottom of the ocean, fish food. You're alone, Alara. You've always been alone. She's not alone. The voice didn't come from the room. It came from the security intercom on the wall. Suddenly, the lights in the villa flickered and died. A second later, a massive explosion rocked the front gates. The sound of high-caliber gunfire began to echo through the stone halls, not the sporadic fire of a skirmish, but the rhythmic, devastating advance of a man who didn't care about cover. Dante was here.
He didn't sneak in.
He didn't use tactics. He walked through the front door with a shotgun in one hand and a submachine gun in the other, a vengeful god in a black suit. Every Valenti soldier who stepped into the hallway was met with a storm of lead. Dante was hit. A bullet grazed his shoulder, another caught his thigh, but he didn't stop. He didn't even flinch. He was losing control, but it wasn't the heat of passion this time. It was the cold, absolute clarity of slaughter. In the basement, Silas panicked. He pulled a handgun from his belt and pointed it at Alara's head. Tell him to stop. Tell him I'll kill you. The heavy steel door of the basement was kicked off its hinges with a force that shook the foundations. Dante stood in the doorway, drenched in blood, his eyes glowing with a lethal, sapphire light. Step away from my wife, Dante said. It was the first time he had used the word wife and meant it with every fiber of his being. I'll do it, Dante.
I swear.
Silas screamed, his hand shaking. Dante didn't stop walking. He stepped into the room, ignoring the gun pointed at Alara. He looked at Silas with a contempt so profound it seemed to freeze the air. You think you can threaten me with her life? Dante asked, his voice a low, terrifying growl. You gave her to me. She belongs to me. And in my world, Silas, we don't negotiate with thieves. Dante raised his weapon, but he didn't aim at Silas. He aimed at the ceiling. Crack. A heavy iron chandelier, loosened by the earlier explosions, came crashing down. It didn't hit Silas, but the distraction was all Alara needed. She threw her weight sideways, toppling the chair and slamming her shoulder into Silas's knees. Silas fell, his gun skittering across the floor. Dante was on him in a heartbeat. He didn't shoot him. He dropped his weapons and used his bare hands. The devil was out of his cage. He rained blows down on Silas until the man was a sobbing, unrecognizable heap of flesh. "Dante, stop!" Alara cried out from the floor. "Don't let him turn you into a monster." Dante froze, his fist hovering inches from Silas's broken face. He looked at Alara, really looked at her. The rage in his eyes flickered, then died, replaced by a raw, aching tenderness. He left Silas on the floor and rushed to Alara, ripping the chains from the wall with a strength born of pure adrenaline. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. "I thought I lost you," he choked out, his voice breaking. I thought the last thing I told you was that this meant nothing." Alara buried her face in his neck, the scent of gunpowder and sandalwood the most beautiful thing she had ever smelled. "You're a terrible liar, Dante Moretti." "I know," he whispered. "I'm done lying." But as they stood to leave, a shadow moved in the corner. Marco, the traitor, had crawled to the discarded gun on the floor. He leveled it at Dante's back. "If I don't get the money," Marco wheezed, "nobody gets the girl."
Bang!
The shot echoed through the basement. But Dante didn't fall. Alara looked past him. Standing in the doorway was Maria, the old woman from the village, holding a vintage Lupra shotgun. The smoke curled from the barrels. Marco lay dead, a massive hole in his chest. "A Moretti never leaves behind what belongs to him," Maria said simply, her eyes meeting Dante's. "And a Moretti mother never lets a traitor live." The sanctuary was a speck of emerald in the sapphire expanse of the Ionian Sea, a private island known as La Sola della Fenice. Here, the air didn't smell of gunpowder or betrayal. It smelled of wild thyme, salt, and the sweet, heavy scent of blooming jasmine. For 3 days, the world was silent. There were no phones, no soldiers, and no shadows of the Valeni family. There was only the sound of the waves and the heavy, rhythmic breathing of 2 people who had survived the impossible. Dante sat on the terrace of the white stone villa, his chest bare, revealing the tapestry of scars that told the story of a life lived in the dark. A fresh white bandage was wrapped around his ribs, and another covered the graze on his shoulder. He was staring out at the horizon, a glass of amber liquid untouched in his hand. Alara stepped out from the shadows of the bedroom, wearing one of Dante's oversized silk shirts. Her hair was damp from the shower, and the bruises on her face had faded to a light gold. "You haven't slept," she said softly, leaning against the doorframe. Dante didn't turn around, but his shoulders relaxed at the sound of her voice. "Sleep is a habit I've had to break. Every time I close my eyes, I see the boat exploding. I see Silas's gun pointed at your head." Alara walked over and stood behind him, her hands resting on his shoulders. She felt the tension in his muscles, a man built for war, suddenly finding himself at peace. "We're alive, Dante. We're safe." Dante turned then, pulling her into his lap. He looked at her with an intensity that was almost painful. The Mafia boss persona had been stripped away, leaving behind a man who looked like he was seeing the sun for the first time. "I told you this marriage meant nothing," he whispered, his thumb tracing the curve of her lower lip. "I told you that you were just a debt. I lied to you, Alara. But mostly, I lied to myself. And now?" Dante's eyes darkened, his hand sliding into her hair, pulling her face closer to his. "Now I've lost control. I don't care about the ledger. I don't care about the assets. If the world wants to burn, let it burn, as long as you're standing in the ashes with me." The kiss that followed wasn't fueled by the adrenaline of a fight or the desperation of survival. It was slow, deep, and filled with a raw, terrifying honesty. In the quiet of the island, the walls they had built against each other finally crumbled. Dante didn't just want her. He needed her. He was the king of a dark empire, but she was the only one who held the key to his soul. As they retreated into the cool shadows of the bedroom, the meaningless vow was replaced by a silent, passionate pact. That night, under the Mediterranean moon, they weren't a boss and a pawn. They were 2 broken souls finding a strange, beautiful wholeness in each other. The following morning, the peace was shattered. While Dante was at the docks checking the perimeter, Alara found a small, locked mahogany chest in the villa's study. It was tucked behind a row of ancient leather-bound books. Using a hairpin and the skills her father had forced her to learn, she clicked the lock open. Inside were photos. But they weren't photos of the Moretti business. They were photos of her. Photos of Alara as a child. Alara at her Mossad training camp in the Negev desert. Alara graduating from university. Every milestone of her life was documented in these files. And at the bottom of the stack was a letter, dated 10 years ago. The handwriting was elegant, authoritative. Silas Vance is a weak man, but his daughter is a diamond in the rough. Continue the funding for her instructors.
Ensure she is trained by the best.
When the time is right, she will be the perfect blade to sharpen my son. She will be the only thing he cannot control, and therefore, the only thing that can save him from his own coldness. The signature at the bottom made Alara's blood turn to ice. Lorenzo Moretti. Dante's father. The man who was supposed to have died 5 years ago in a heart attack that paved the way for Dante to take the throne. What are you doing? Dante stood in the doorway, his face shadowed. He saw the file in her hand. He saw the look of horror on her face. Your father isn't dead, is he? Alara whispered, her voice trembling. This marriage, it wasn't a debt Silas owed you. It was a deal between two fathers. My father gave me up for money, but your father bought me to sharpen you. I was a project, a training exercise. Dante walked into the room, his eyes scanning the documents. He grew incredibly still. The air in the room became heavy, suffocating. I didn't know, Dante said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. I thought he was gone. I thought I was free of a shadow. He orchestrated the plane crash, didn't he? Alara's mind raced, connecting the dots. He knew the Valentis would attack. He wanted to see if you would jump after me. He wanted to see if you would lose control. A test, Dante hissed, slamming his fist into the mahogany desk. He treated our lives like a game of chess. Suddenly, the villa's security system chimed. A video feed on the desk monitor flickered to life. An old man sat in a high-backed leather chair in a room that looked exactly like the study they were standing in. He was thin, with white hair and eyes that looked exactly like Dante's, cold, calculating, and ancient. Congratulations, Dante, the man in the video said. His voice was a rasping echo of the past. You survived. You saved the girl. You showed the passion of a true Moretti. You finally lost the control that was making you weak. Father, Dante growled at the screen. Don't look so angry, my son. Lorenzo Moretti smiled, a chilling, toothless expression. The Valentis are gone. Silas Vance is a broken man. And you? You have a queen who can kill a man with her bare hands and look like an angel while doing it. The Moretti bloodline is secure. I'm coming for you, Dante promised, his voice dripping with lethal intent. I know you are, Lorenzo replied. That was the final lesson. To truly rule, you must kill the man who made you. I'm at the old estate in Sicily. I've left the gates open. Come and show me that you've truly become the devil I raised you to be. The screen went black. Alara looked at Dante. The man she loved was standing on the edge of a precipice. The honeymoon had been a beautiful lie, a stage set by a ghost to transform them into weapons. Dante, she said, reaching for his hand. He wants you to kill him. He wants to complete your training by making you a murderer of your own blood. Dante looked at her, his expression unreadable. He's right about one thing, Alara. I have become the devil. But he made one mistake. What's that? He thought he was the one in control. Dante picked up his gun from the desk, his eyes burning with a new, terrifying light. But he forgot that I'm not playing his game anymore. I'm playing yours, and we're going to end this, together. The ancestral Moretti estate in Sicily sat atop a jagged cliff like a crown of thorns. Built from volcanic stone and weathered by centuries of salt and blood, it was a place where secrets went to die. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and violent orange, a lone black SUV wound its way up the narrow gravel road. Dante sat behind the wheel, his knuckles white. Beside him, Alara checked the action on her suppressed pistol. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The island had forged them into something more than husband and wife. They were two halves of a single, lethal soul. The gates are open, Alara whispered as they approached the towering iron entrance. He wants us to see the stage he set, Dante replied, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He spent 40 years playing God. He thinks tonight is his masterpiece. They stepped out into the courtyard. The air was unnervingly still. No guards greeted them.
No dogs barked.
Only the rhythmic tolling of a bell from a nearby chapel broke the silence. As they entered the grand hall, the scent of old paper and expensive tobacco filled the air. At the far end of the room, sitting behind a massive oak desk, was Lorenzo Moretti. He looked even more frail in person than on the screen, but his eyes, those steel blue eyes, were sharp enough to cut glass. "You're late," Lorenzo said, tapping the ash from his cigar. "I expected you at noon. I see the girl has made you cautious, Dante. Or perhaps
Distracted?
Dante didn't stop until he was 10 feet from the desk. He didn't raise his weapon yet. He just stared at the man who had faked his own death to pull the strings of his life like a puppeteer. "The game is over, father," Dante said. "I've killed the Valentes. I've broken Silas Vance. I've passed your tests. Now, I'm here to collect the prize." Lorenzo chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "The prize? You think this estate, this title is the prize? You still don't understand the magnitude of what I've built." Lorenzo turned his gaze toward Alara. A strange, twisted look of pride crossed his face. "Tell me, Alara, did Silas ever tell you why you were so valuable? Why he was so afraid of you that he kept you under a microscope?" Alara stepped forward, her gun leveled at Lorenzo's heart. "He told me I was an insurance policy."
A spy.
"A spy." Lorenzo laughed harder this time. "Silas was a fool. You aren't just an insurance policy. You are the ledger." Dante froze.
What are you talking about?
"You told me the ledger was a myth." "I told the world it was a myth," Lorenzo corrected. "In the 1990s, when the digital age began, I realized that data could be hacked, servers could be burned. I needed a way to store the encryption keys to the Moretti offshore empire, a billion-dollar network, where no one would ever look. I needed a biological vault." He stood up, his legs shaky, but his presence commanding. "Your mother, Alara, she was my most brilliant researcher. Before she disappeared, she encoded the master keys into your very DNA using a sequence of non-coding proteins. It's a dormant sequence, harmless to you, but with a simple blood draw and the right sequencer, it unlocks the entire Moretti treasury." The room went cold. Alara felt a wave of nausea. Her entire life, the training, the selling of her hand in marriage, wasn't about loyalty or debt. She was a literal walking bank vault. "Silas found out," Lorenzo continued. "He tried to keep you for himself, but he didn't have the sequencer. I did. I needed you here, in this house, with my son. I needed Dante to fall for you, to protect you with his life so that when the time came, the ledger would be safe under the Moretti name." "You used us," Dante hissed, his hand trembling on his holster. "You made me love her just to secure your money?" "Love is the only lock that doesn't break, Dante," Lorenzo said coldly. "But now, the final test. The Valenti remnants are at the gate. They know about the DNA. They don't want the money. They want to burn it, so we have nothing." Lorenzo pulled a small, silver remote from his pocket. "This estate is rigged with thermite. In 5 minutes, everything burns. I have a helicopter waiting on the roof. It has room for 2. But there's a catch." He pointed to a monitor on the wall. It showed a tactical team, not Valenti's, but a Black Ops group Alara recognized. The Vultures. Her father's most ruthless shadow unit, now working for a mystery bidder. "They have the sequencer," Lorenzo said. "If they capture Alara, they win. If you take her and run, they'll hunt you forever. But if you kill her now, Dante, the sequence dies with her. The money vanishes. The Vultures have no reason to hunt you. You can be free." A man with no empire, but a man with his life.
Dante looked at Alara.
Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of betrayal and defiance. Dante, she whispered. Choose, my son, Lorenzo urged, his voice like a serpent's hiss. Empire or freedom? The mafia boss or the man? To truly rule, you must be willing to sacrifice the thing you love most. That is the final lesson of the Moretti bloodline. The sound of the front doors being breached echoed through the house. The vultures were inside. Dante slowly drew his gun. He looked at the barrel, then at Alara. He saw the woman who had jumped into the ocean for him. He saw the woman who had bled for him. He saw the only thing in his life that wasn't a lie. He turned back to his father. You're right about one thing, Lorenzo, Dante said, his voice as cold as the grave. Love is the only lock that doesn't break.
Bang!
The shot didn't hit Alara. It hit the monitor on the wall, shattering Lorenzo's view of the world. But you forgot one detail, Dante said, stepping toward his father. I'm not a Moretti like you. I don't sacrifice what's mine. I destroy the person who tries to take it. Dante grabbed the remote from Lorenzo's hand and smashed it under his boot. We aren't taking the helicopter. And we aren't running. You'll die, Lorenzo screamed, his mask of composure finally breaking. No, Alara said, stepping up beside Dante, her eyes burning with a lethal light. We're going to show them why you spent 20 years trying to turn us into weapons. Suddenly, a hidden door behind the desk slid open. A woman stepped out. She was older, with gray hair and a face that mirrored Alara's with haunting precision. Mother? Alara gasped. The ledger isn't in her DNA, Lorenzo, the woman said, her voice steady and filled with a decade of suppressed rage. I lied to you. I encoded the keys into your accounts, which I've been draining for the last hour while you played your little game. Alara is just a girl who deserved a better father. And you're just a man who ran out of time. The plot twist hit Lorenzo like a physical blow. He staggered back, clutching his chest.
Elena?
He gasped. The vultures aren't here for her, Elena said, looking at Dante and Alara. They're here for him. I called them. I told them the ghost of Sicily was ready to pay his debts. As the sounds of the tactical team reached the hallway, Dante grabbed Alara's hand. We leave. Now, Dante commanded. What about the money? Lorenzo wheezed, falling to his knees. Dante looked back at the man who had ruined so many lives.
Keep it.
It'll help pay for your funeral. The Moretti estate was no longer a home. It was a furnace. Flames licked the ancient tapestries, and the scent of ozone and gunpowder filled the grand halls. As the vultures' tactical team swarmed the lower levels to claim Lorenzo, Dante, Alara, and her mother, Elena, moved like shadows through the servant passages. The boat is at the sea cave, Elena whispered, her eyes sharp despite the years of hiding. I've spent a decade preparing this exit. Lorenzo was so obsessed with his biological vault that he never noticed the ghost in his own walls. They reached the cliffside elevator, a rusted iron cage hidden behind a false rock face. As the elevator groaned its way down toward the crashing waves, Alara looked at Dante. He was covered in soot, his shirt torn, his eyes reflecting the orange glow of the burning mansion above. It's over, Dante, she said, her hand finding his. Not yet, Dante replied, his voice a low, focused growl. He checked the horizon. A single, high-powered yacht was idling just outside the cove. There's one more rat in the walls. The elevator hit the bottom with a jarring thud. As the gates opened, they weren't met by the empty cave. Standing on the narrow stone pier was Silas Vance. He looked like a man who had crawled out of hell. His suit was scorched, his face a mask of bloody desperation, and in his hand, he held a remote detonator. Beside him sat Don Valeni, the patriarch of the Sicilian syndicate, looking calm and bored as he leaned on a silver cane. You really are difficult to kill, Dante, Don Valeni said, his voice smooth as silk. And Elena, a beautiful surprise. I thought Lorenzo had disposed of you years ago. Silas, put the detonator down, Alara commanded, stepping in front of Dante.
No.
Silas shrieked, his voice cracking with madness. Everything. I lost everything. My reputation, my money, the Moretti debt. If I don't get the codes, if I don't get to be the man I was meant to be, then no one leaves this cave. Silas's thumb hovered over the red button. The sea cave was rigged with the same thermite Lorenzo had used in the villa. You were never the man you were meant to be, Silas, Dante said, stepping forward, his presence filling the cave with a terrifying gravity. You were a man who sold his daughter to a devil because you were too weak to pay your own bills. You aren't a king. You aren't even a player. You're just a mistake I'm about to correct. I'll do it, Silas screamed, his eyes darting wildly. I'll blow us all to hell. Don Valenti sighed, checking his watch. He's become quite tedious, hasn't he? Silas, dear friend, you've outlived your usefulness. You failed to secure the girl, failed to secure the ledger, and now you're holding a button that would destroy my yacht. Before Silas could react, Valenti's bodyguard, a silent mountain of a man, stepped behind Silas and snapped his neck with a sickening, clinical crack. Silas Vance fell to the stone pier like a discarded rag doll, the detonator clattering harmlessly into the water. The man who had sold his daughter for a dream of power died in the dirt, a nameless pawn in a game he never understood. There, Valenti said, stepping onto his yacht. Now that the trash has been cleared. Dante, I have no quarrel with you. Your father was a madman. I have the keys Elena sent to my accounts, a generous exit tax for your freedom. We shall consider the Moretti Valenti feud settled. And if I come for you next? Dante asked. Valenti smiled, a cold, predatory expression. Then you would be a king. And kings know that some wars are too expensive to fight. Live your life, Dante. Enjoy your meaningless marriage. The yacht roared to life and sped away into the night, leaving the three of them on the dark, quiet pier. 1 month later, the Amalfi sun was warm on Alera's skin as she sat on the deck of a small, unlisted villa in Greece. The world believed Dante Moretti and Alera Vance had died in the Sicilian fire. Their names had vanished from the ledgers of the underworld. Elena had gone to Switzerland, finally free to live the life she had lost. The Moretti wealth had been split, half given to the families Lorenzo had destroyed, the other half hidden in accounts that only Alera could access. Dante walked out onto the deck, wearing a simple linen shirt and trousers. He looked younger, the hardness in his eyes replaced by a quiet, steady peace. He sat down beside her, handing her a glass of chilled wine. You're thinking about it again, he said, his voice a soft caress. About what? The wedding, he said, a smirk touching his lips. The day I told you this marriage meant nothing. Alera laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. You are so convincing. The devil of Chicago. So in control, so cold. Dante pulled her closer, his hand resting on the small swell of her stomach, a secret they had only discovered a week ago. The Moretti bloodline would continue, but not in the shadows of the Mafia. I lost control the second I saw you walk down that aisle, Dante admitted, his voice raw with honesty. I just didn't have the courage to admit that a girl in a lace dress had conquered the man who couldn't be broken. And now? She asked, looking up at him. Dante leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a vow that was far more sacred than the one they had taken in that cold Chicago chapel. Now, this marriage is the only thing that means anything.
You are my debt, Alera.
You're my life. As the sun set over the Aegean Sea, the shadows of the past finally disappeared. The Mafia boss had lost control, but in doing so, he had found something far more powerful, a love that was worth more than any empire.